The Dhammapada, Chapter 26, Brāhmaṇa Vagga, the Brāhmaṇa, final chapter of the Dhammapada, verse 383. Realize the uncreated. Chindaso tang parakhamma, kame panuda Brāhmaṇa, sankharanang khayang nyatva, akatanyusi Brāhmaṇa. O Brāhmaṇa, cut off the stream of craving with diligence, and abandon sense desires. Knowing the destruction of conditioned things, be, O Brāhmaṇa, the knower of the unmade, Nibbana. Not all bhikkhus are Arahants. Once in Savatthi, there lived a Brahmin who became extremely devoted to the Buddha and his bhikkhus. Always he would invite the bhikkhus to his house for alms food. When they arrived at his house, he addressed them as Arahants and respectfully requested them to enter his house. When they were addressed thus, those who had not attained Arahanthood felt embarrassed, and after that they avoided going to the Brahmin's house. When the bhikkhus avoided his house, the Brahmin felt sad and depressed. He reported to the Buddha that the bhikkhus were avoiding his house. When questioned, they told the Buddha that the Brahmin addressed all of them as Arahants. He then asked them whether they felt false pride and undue elation when they were thus addressed. They answered in the negative. To them the Buddha said, Bhikkhus, the Brahmin is using this form of address only out of respect because of his boundless devotion to the Arahants. Bhikkhus should try to attain Arahanthood by uprooting the stream of craving. Verse 384. Cultivate collectedness of mind and insight. Yada dvayesu dhammesu paragu hoti brahmano athassa sabbe sanyoga athangachanti janato. When in two states a Brāhmana goes to the farther shore, then all the fetters of that one who knows pass away. Tranquility and insight. On one occasion, a group of bhikkhus came to pay homage to the Buddha. The Venerable Sariputta, seeing that the time was ripe for those bhikkhus to attain Arahanthood, approached the Buddha and asked a question, solely for the benefit of those bhikkhus. The question was, what are the two Dhammas? The Buddha replied, Sariputta, tranquility and insight meditation are the two Dhammas for maintaining peace and reality in life. Verse 385. The unbound person is a Brāhmana. Yassa parang aparang va Paraparang na vijjati, vitaddarang visangyuttang, tang ahang brumi Brāhmaṇa. He who has for himself neither this shore nor the other shore, and who is undistressed and free from moral defilements, him I call a Brāhmana. Where is the other shore? On one occasion, Mara came to the Buddha disguised as a man and asked, Venerable Sir, you often say the word param. What is the meaning of that word? The Buddha, knowing that it was Mara who was asking that question, admonished him, O wicked Mara, the word param has nothing to do with you. Param, which means the other shore, can be reached only by the Arahants who are free from moral defilements. Verse 386. He who is meditative and pure is a Brāhmaṇa. Jhāying virajang asinang katakichang anasavang uttamattang anupattang tang ahang brūmi Brāhmaṇaṃ. He who is meditative, stainless and secluded, he who has done his duty and is free from corruptions, he who has attained the highest goal, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Who is a real Brāhmaṇa? One day, a Brahmin thought to himself, Gautama Buddha calls his disciples Brāhmaṇa. I am also a Brahmin by caste. I should also be called a Brāhmaṇa. So thinking, he went to the Buddha and posed his question. The Buddha replied, I don't call one a Brāhmaṇa simply because of his caste or birth. I only call one a Brāhmaṇa who has attained Arahanthood. A note from the author. In Buddhism, sainthood or Arahanthood or enlightenment cannot be conferred on anybody. We have to work to attain sainthood ourselves. Neither our teachers nor even the Buddha can confer that onto anyone. All beings have the potential to become saints by purifying their minds of all mental impurities and defilements. Verse 387. The Buddha shines throughout day and night. Diva tapati adiccho ratting abhati chandima sannadho khattiyo tapati jahayi tapati brahmano attha sabbang ahoratting buddho tapati tejasa. By day shines the sun, by night shines the moon. In regalia shines the king, in meditation shines the Arahant. But the Buddha in his glory shines at all times, by day and by night. Glory of the Buddha. It was the full moon day of the 7th month when King Pasenadi of Kosala came to visit the Buddha. The king was then resplendent in his full royal regalia. At that time, Venerable Kaludayi was also present in the same room, sitting at the edge of the congregation. He was in deep mental absorption of jhana, and his body became bright and golden. In the sky, the Venerable Ananda noticed that the sun was setting and the moon was just coming out, with both the sun and the moon radiating rays of light. When Ananda looked at the Buddha, he suddenly perceived that the light that was then radiating from the Buddha far surpassed the light shining from the others. Seeing the Buddha in his glory and splendor, Ananda immediately exclaimed, O Venerable Sir, the light that shines forth from your noble body far surpasses the light from the king, the light from Venerable Kaludayi, and the light from the sun and the moon. The Buddha replied, All Buddhas shine both by night and by day, and shine with fivefold brightness. A note from the author. In reference to the fivefold brightness mentioned above, here we are reminded that the Buddha eclipses immorality by the power of morality, or sila, vice by the power of virtue, or guna, ignorance by the power of wisdom, or panya, demerit by the power of merit, punya, and unrighteousness by the power of righteousness, Dhamma. Verse 388. Holy has discarded all evil. bahitapapoti brahmano samacharya samanoti vucchati pabbajai attano malang tasma pabbajitoti vucchati. Because he has discarded evil, he is called a Brāhmaṇa. Because he lives in peace, he is called a samana. Because he gives up the impurities, he is called a pabbajita, a recluse. Not every recluse is a bhikkhu. Once there was a Brahmin ascetic in Savatthi. One day it occurred to him that the Buddha called his disciples pabbajita, bhikkhus, and since he was also a recluse, he should also be called pabbajita. So he went to the Buddha and posed his question. The Buddha replied, I don't call a recluse a pabbajita. A pabbajita is one who has uprooted all defilements and impurities of the mind. Verse 389. Harm not an Arahant. Na Brāhmanasya paharaya Nasya munchetha Brāhmano Dhi Brāhmanasya hantaram Tato dhi yasya munchati. One should not strike a Brāhmana, nor should a Brāhmana vent his wrath on one who has struck him. Shame on him who strikes a Brāhmana. More shame on him who gives vent to his own wrath. Verse 390. An Arahant does not retaliate. Na Brāhmanasya tada kinchiseyo yada nisedho manaso piyehi yato yato himsamano nivattati tato tato sammatimeva dukkham. Unto a Brāhmana that non-retaliation is of no small advantage. When the mind is weaned from things dear, whenever the intent to harm ceases, then and then only doeth sorrow subside. No one should strike an Arahant. The Venerable Sariputta was often praised by many people for his patience and forbearance. His pupils usually said, Our teacher is a man of great patience and extreme endurance. If he is abused or even beaten by others, he does not lose his temper, but remains calm and composed. A certain Brahmin, holding wrong views, declared he would provoke Venerable Sariputta into anger. When he saw Sariputta on his alms round, he went and hit him on his back with his hand, with full force. Venerable Sariputta did not even look around to see who was the person who hit him, but proceeded on his way as if nothing had happened. The Brahmin felt ashamed at what he had done. He got down on his knees at the feet of Venerable Sariputta, admitted his grievous mistake, and asked for pardon. The Brahmin then continued, Venerable Sir, should you forgive me, kindly come to my house for alms food. In the evening, other bhikkhus reported to the Buddha that Venerable Sariputta had gone for alms food to the house of a Brahmin who had beaten him. Further, they commented that the Brahmin was sure to get bolder, and he would soon be assaulting other bhikkhus also. The Buddha replied, Bhikkhus, a true Brahmin does not beat another true Brahmin. Only an ordinary man or ordinary Brahmin would beat an Arahant in anger and ill will. Verse 391. He is a true Brahmana who is well-restrained. Yassa kayena vachaya manasa nati dukkatang sangutang tihi tanehi tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He that does no evil through body, speech, or mind, who is restrained in these three respects, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Mahapajapati Gotami asks for ordination. Mahapajapati Gotami was the stepmother of Gautama Buddha. On the death of Queen Maya, 7 days after the birth of Prince Siddhartha, she became the chief queen of King Suddhodana. At the time, her own son, Nanda, was only 5 days old. She let her own son be raised by a nurse, and she herself brought up Prince Siddhartha, the future Buddha. Thus, she was a great benefactress to Prince Siddhartha. When Prince Siddhartha returned to Kapilavatthu after his attainment of Buddhahood, Mahapajapati went to see him and requested that women should be allowed to enter the order as bhikkhunis. However, the Buddha refused to grant his permission. Later, King Suddhodana died after attaining Arahanthood. Then, while the Buddha was staying at the Mahavana forest near Vesali, Mahapajapati, accompanied by 500 ladies, came on foot from Kapilavatthu to Vesali. They had already shaven their heads and had put on the dyed robes. For the second time, she requested the Buddha to accept women into the order. The Venerable Ananda also interceded on her behalf. Finally, the Buddha complied, with the proviso that she abide by 8 special conditions, Garu Dhammas. She undertook to observe the Garu Dhammas as required, and the Buddha admitted her into the order. Thus, Mahapajapati was the first to be admitted to the order of the bhikkhunis. The other women were also admitted to the order. In course of time, it came to the minds of some bhikkhunis that Mahapajapati had not been properly admitted as a bhikkhuni because she did not have a preceptor. Therefore, she was not a true bhikkhuni. With this thought in their minds, they stopped conducting religious ceremonies with her. When the matter was reported to the Buddha, he replied, "Why do you say so? I myself gave the 8 Garu Dhammas to Mahapajapati, and she had learned and practiced the Garu Dhammas as required by me. I myself am her preceptor. You should harbor no doubt whatsoever about an Arahant." Verse 392. Honor to whom honor is due. Yamha dhammang vijanaya samma sambuddha desitam sakkachang tang namassaya ajjihuttam va brahmano. If from anybody one should understand the doctrine preached by the enlightened one, devoutly should one revere him, as a Brahmin reveres the sacrificial fire. Honor those worthy of honor. The Venerable Sariputta was born of Brahmin parents in Upatissa village. That is why he was named Upatissa. His mother was Sari. His very close friend was Kolita, another Brahmin youth, son of Moggali. Both the youths were searching for the right doctrine which would lead them to liberation from the round of rebirths, and both of them had a great desire to enter a religious order. First, they went to Sanjaya, but they were not satisfied with his teaching. Then they wandered all over looking for a teacher who would show them the way to the deathless. But their search was fruitless. After some time, they parted company, but with the understanding that one who found the true Dhamma first should inform the other. About that time, the Buddha arrived at Rajagaha with a company of bhikkhus, including Venerable Assaji, one of the group of first 5 bhikkhus. While Venerable Assaji was on alms round, Upatissa saw him and was very much impressed by his noble countenance. So Upatissa respectfully approached Venerable Assaji and asked who his teacher was, what doctrine his teacher taught, and also to briefly explain the doctrine to him. Venerable Assaji then told Upatissa about the arising of the Buddha and about his stay at the Veluvana monastery in Rajagaha. He also quoted a short stanza. Ye dhamma hetuppa bhava te sanghetung tathagato aha te sancha yo nirodho evam vadi mahasamano. The Tathagata has declared the cause and also the cessation of all phenomena which arise from a cause. This is the doctrine taught by the great Samana. When the verse was only half uttered, Upatissa comprehended the Dhamma and became a stream enterer. As promised, Upatissa went to inform his friend Kolita that he had found the true Dhamma. In repeating the verse to Kolita, his friend as well became a stream enterer. Then the 2 friends, accompanied by many followers, went to the Buddha and requested permission to enter the order. Thus, Upatissa and Kolita, together with their followers, were admitted as bhikkhus. Upatissa and Kolita then came to be known as Venerables Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, respectively. Soon after, Venerable Mahamoggallana and Venerable Sariputta attained arahanthood. The Venerable Sariputta always remembered that he had been able to meet the Buddha and attain the deathless through Venerable Assaji. So he always paid respects in the direction where his teacher was, and he always went to bed with his head in the same direction. Other bhikkhus who were staying with him at the Jetavana monastery misinterpreted his actions and told the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Sariputta still worships the various directions, as he had done before as a Brahmin youth. It seems as if he has not yet given up his old beliefs." Sariputta explained that he was only paying respects to his teacher, the Venerable Assaji, and that he was not worshipping the various directions. The Buddha then said, "Bhikkhus, Sariputta is not worshipping the various directions. He is only paying respects to his teacher, who paved the way for him to meet the Buddha. It is right for him to pay homage to such a teacher." Verse 393. Pure is he who is truthful and righteous. Na jata hi na gotte na jacha hoti Brāhmaṇo yam hi satchancha dhammocha so suchi so cha Brāhmaṇo. Not by matted hair, nor by family, nor by birth does one become a Brāhmana, but in whom there exists both truth and righteousness, pure is he, a Brāhmana is he. A Brāhmana is one who has realized the Dhamma. Once, a Brahmin ascetic thought that the Buddha called his disciples Brāhmana, and that being a Brahmin by birth, he should also be called a Brāhmana. Thinking thus, he went to see the Buddha and put forward his view. The Buddha did not accept his view and said, "O Brahmin, I don't call one a Brahmana because he keeps his hair matted or simply because of his birth. I call one a Brahmana only if he fully comprehends the Four Noble Truths." Verse 394. Be pure within. Kinte jatahi dummedha, kinte ajina satya, abhantarang te gahanang, bahirang parimajjasi. O foolish one, what is the use of your matted hair? What is the use of your wearing a garment made of antelope skin? Within, you are full of passions. Without, you embellish yourself. It is not easy to mislead the wise. Once, a deceitful Brahmin climbed up a tree near the city gate of Vesali and kept himself hanging upside down like a bat from one of the branches of the tree. From this very awkward position, he kept on muttering, "O people, give me 100 head of cattle, give me money, give me a woman-slave. If you don't bring these to me, and if I were to fall down from this tree and die, the city of yours will surely come to ruin." The ignorant people of the city, fearing that their city might be destroyed if the Brahmin were to fall down and die, brought all the things he demanded and pleaded with him to come down. The bhikkhus related the incident to the Buddha, who said that the deceitful one could only cheat the ignorant people, but not the wise ones. Verse 395. A Brahmana meditates alone in the forest. Pansukula dharang jantum, kisang dhamani santatang, ekang vanasming jayantang, tang ahang brumi brahmanam. The person who wears dust-heap robes, who is lean, whose veins stand out, who meditates alone in the forest, him I call a Brahmana. The Buddha praises Kisa Gotami. On one occasion, Sakka, king of the Devas, came with his followers to pay homage to the Buddha. At the same time, Bhikkhuni Kisa Gotami, by her supernormal power, came through the sky to pay homage to the Buddha. But when she saw Sakka and his entourage paying homage, she retreated. Sakka, on seeing her, asked who the lady was. The Buddha replied, "O Sakka, she is my daughter, Kisa Gotami. Once she came to me in sorrow and distress through the loss of her son, and I made her see the impermanent nature of all component things. As a consequence of that, she comprehended the Dhamma, joined the order, and attained Arahanthood. She is one of my eminent female disciples." Verse 396. The non-possessive and the non-attached person is a Brahmana. Nachahang Brahmanang brumi yonijang matti sambhavang bhovadi namaso hoti sache hoti sakinchano akinchanang anadanang tang aham brumi brahmanang. I do not call him a Brahmana merely because he is born of a Brahmin womb or sprung from a Brahmin mother. He is merely a dear sir addresser, if he be with impediments. He who is free from impediments, free from clinging, him I call a Brahmana. One cannot become a Brahmana by birth. Once a Brahmin from Savatthi, thought that since the Buddha called his disciples Brahmana, he should also be called a Brahmana, because he was born of Brahmin parents. When the Brahmin told the Buddha about this, he replied, "O Brahmin, I do not call one a Brahmana just because he is born of Brahmin parents. I call a Brahmana only one who is free from defilements and who has cut off all clinging to existence." Verse 397. A Brahmana is he who has destroyed all fetters. Sabba sanyojanang chetva yovena paritassati sangatigang visangyuttang tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who has cut off all fetters and is fearless, who is beyond attachment and is free from moral defilements, him I call a Brahmana. One who has cut off fetters has no fear. Uggasena. After marrying a dancer from a theatrical troupe, Uggasena was trained by his father-in-law, who was an acrobat, and became very skillful in acrobatics. One day, while he was demonstrating his skill, the Buddha came to the scene. After hearing the Buddha's teaching, Uggasena attained Arahanthood while he was still on top of the long bamboo pole. After that, he climbed down from the pole and requested the Buddha to accept him as a disciple, and was accordingly admitted into the order. One day, when questioned, Uggasena told some bhikkhus that he had felt no fear when he was on top of the bamboo pole. The bhikkhus asked the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Uggasena claims to be an Arahant. Is it true?" The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, one who has cut off all fetters like Uggasena has no fear. He is indeed an Arahant." Verse 398. A Brahmana is he who has no hatred. Chetva nadhim varattancha sandamang sahanukamang ukhitta paligham buddhang tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who has cut the strap of hatred, the thong of craving, and the rope of heresies, together with the appendages of latent tendencies, who has thrown up the crossbar of ignorance, who is awakened, an Arahant, him I call a Brahmana. Cut the strap of craving. Once there lived in Savatthi 2 Brahmins, each of whom owned an ox. Each claimed that his ox was better and stronger. At last they agreed to put their animals to the test. So they went to the bank of a river, and there they filled up the cart with sand. One after the other, the oxen pulled the cart, but they only pulled in vain, because the cart did not move and the ropes broke off. On seeing this, the bhikkhus reported to the Buddha, who said, "Bhikkhus, it is easy to break off the straps which you can see with your own eyes. Anyone can break them or cut them. But my sons, a bhikkhu should cut the straps of anger and craving which are within you and which bind you." Verse 399. A Brahmana is he who is patient. Akko sang vadha bandhancha adu toyo titikhati kanti balang balanikang tang aham brumi brahmanam. He who without anger endures abuse, flogging, and punishment, whose strength of patience is like the strength of an army. Him I call a Brāhmana. The Buddha subdues the abusive brothers. Once there was a Brahmin whose wife was in the habit of blurting out a string of words whenever she sneezed or when something or someone touched her accidentally. One day, the Brahmin invited some of his friends to a meal, and suddenly she blurted out some words. Since she had attained the first stage of sainthood, the words Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa automatically came out of her mouth. These words of veneration to the Buddha angered her husband. So, in anger, he went to the Buddha, hoping to put some challenging questions to him. His first question was, what do we have to kill to be able to live peacefully? And his second question was, what do we have to kill to be able to live happily? The Buddha replied, O Brahmin, to be able to live happily and peacefully, one will have to kill anger or dosa. Killing one's anger is liked and praised by the Buddhas and Arahants. The Brahmin was so impressed and satisfied with the answer that he entered the order and later became an Arahant. When the younger brother heard that his eldest brother had joined the order, he became furious. He went straight away to the monastery to abuse the Buddha. But in turn the Buddha asked, O Brahmin, let us suppose you offered some food to some guests, and they left the house without taking the food. Since the guests did not accept your food, to whom would that food belong? The Brahmin replied that the food would be his. On receiving that answer, the Buddha said, in the same way, O Brahmin, since I do not accept your abuse, the abuse would only go back to you. The Brahmin instantly realized the sagacity of those words and felt a great respect for the Buddha. He also entered the order and in due course became an Arahant himself. After that, his two younger brothers came with the same intention of abusing the Buddha. They were made to see the light by the Buddha, and they also, in their turn, entered the order. Eventually, they too became Arahants. One evening, the bhikkhus remarked, "Oh, how wonderful and how great are the virtues of the Buddha! These four Brahmin brothers abused our teacher, but through his infinite wisdom, he helped them realize the truth and became their refuge." The Buddha then replied, "My sons, because I am patient and forbearing, and do no wrong to those who do me wrong, I have become a refuge to many." Verse 400. A Brāhmana is he who is not wrathful. Akkodhanang vatavantang silavantang anussutang dantang antima sarirang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who is free from anger, but is dutiful, virtuous, free from craving, self-controlled, and bears his final body, him I call a Brāhmana. Venerable Sariputta is reviled by his own mother. While the Buddha was in residence at the Veluvana monastery, the Venerable Sariputta, accompanied by a group of bhikkhus, entered Nalaka village and stood at the door of the house of his own mother for alms food. His mother invited them into the house, but while she was offering food to her son, she said, O you consumer of leftovers, you have abandoned all wealth to become a bhikkhu. You have ruined us. Then she offered alms food to the other bhikkhus and said to them rudely, You all have used my son as your attendant. Now eat your food. Sariputta said nothing and just maintained his noble silence. Back at the monastery, the bhikkhus related how Venerable Sariputta had patiently borne the scolding and abuse of his mother. The Buddha commented that Arahants never get angry and they never lose their temper. Verse 401. A Brāhmana clings not to sensual pleasures. Varipukkharapatteva aragyereva sasapo yona limpati kamesu tang aham brumi brahmanang. Like water on a lotus leaf, like a mustard seed on the point of a needle, he who clings not to sensual pleasures, him I call a Brāhmana. An Arahant does not cling to sensual pleasures. Once, some bhikkhus were talking about the Arahant bhikkhuni Uppalavanna being raped by a young man. In this connection, they asked the Buddha whether Arahants do enjoy sensual pleasures, as they have the same physical makeup like other people. The Buddha replied, Bhikkhus, Arahants do not enjoy sensual pleasures. They do not indulge in sensual pleasures, for they do not cling to objects of sense and to sensual pleasures, just as water does not cling to the lotus leaf. Verse 402. A Brāhmana is he who has laid the burden aside. Yodukkassa pajanati idheva khayang attano panna bharang visangyuttang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who realizes here in this world the destruction of his sorrow, who has laid the burden aside and is emancipated, him I call a Brāhmana. The bond servant who became an Arahant. Once there was a young bond servant of a Brahmin who fled from the house of his master and joined the order of the bhikkhus. In due course he attained Arahanthood. One day, while he went on alms round with the Buddha, his former master, the Brahmin, saw him and grabbed him firmly by the robe. When asked what the matter was, the Brahmin explained that the bhikkhu had been his bond servant at one time. The Buddha replied, This bhikkhu has laid down the burden of his life. The Brahmin took that to mean that his slave had become an Arahant. So to make sure, he asked whether it was true that the young bhikkhu had become an Arahant, and the Buddha confirmed his statement. Verse 403. A Brāhmana is he who has reached his ultimate goal. Gambhira panyang medhaving maggamaggas kovidang uttamatthang anupattang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He whose knowledge is deep, who is wise, who is skilled in the right and wrong way, who has reached the highest goal, him I call a Brāhmana. The Buddha praises Khema. One night, Sakka, the king of the Devas, came with his followers to pay homage to the Buddha. At the same time, Bhikkhuni Khema, by her supernormal power, also came through the sky to pay homage to the Buddha. When she saw Sakka and his company were there, she just paid her respects and left. Sakka asked who that bhikkhuni was, and the Buddha replied, "She is one of my eminent female disciples. She is matchless amongst the bhikkhunis in wisdom." Verse 404. A Brāhmaṇa is he who has no intimacy with anyone. Asaṅsatthaṃ gahathehi anagarehi chubhayam anokasariṃ appicchaṃ taṃ aham bromi brahmanam. He who is not intimate either with householders or with the homeless ones, who wanders without an abode, who is without desires, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Bhikkhu Tissa is accused of practicing exorcism. Bhikkhu Tissa, after taking a subject of meditation, went to a mountainside. There he found a cave which suited him, and he spent the 3 months of the rainy season in that cave. He went to the village for alms food every morning. In the village there was a certain elderly woman who regularly offered him alms food. In the cave there also lived a guardian spirit. As Tissa was one whose practice of morality was pure, she found it difficult to remain in the same cave as he was a noble monk. At the same time, she did not have the courage to ask him to leave the place. So she thought of a plan that would enable her to find fault with the monk and thus cause him to leave the cave. The spirit decided to possess the youngest son of the woman to whose house Tissa usually went for his alms food. She caused the boy to behave in a peculiar way, turning his head backwards and rolling his wide open eyes. When the woman saw what had happened, she screamed, and the spirit said, "I have possessed your son. Let your monk wash his feet with water and sprinkle that water on the head of your son. Only then will I release your son." The next day, when the monk came to her house for alms food, she did what was demanded by the spirit, and the boy was left in peace. The spirit went back to the cave and waited to the entrance for the monk. When Tissa returned, she revealed herself and said, "I am the spirit guarding this cave. O you exorcist, don't enter this cave." The monk knew that he had lived a virtuous life from the day he had become a monk, so he replied that he had not broken the precept of abstaining from practicing exorcism or witchcraft. Then she accused Tissa of having treated the young boy, possessed by a spirit, at the house of the elderly woman. But the monk reflected that he had not practiced exorcism, and realized that even the spirit could find no fault with him. That gave him a delightful satisfaction and happiness. He attained Arahanthood while standing at the entrance to the cave. Since Tissa had now become an Arahant, he told the spirit that she had wrongly accused a monk like him, whose virtue was pure and spotless, and also advised her not to cause further disturbances. Tissa continued to stay in the cave till the end of the Vassa, and then he returned to the Jetavana monastery. When he told the other bhikkhus about his encounter with the spirit, they asked him whether he had been angry with the spirit when he was forbidden to enter the cave. He answered in the negative. The other bhikkhus asked the Buddha, "Venerable Tissa claims he has no more anger. Is it true?" The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, Tissa is speaking the truth. he has indeed become an Arahant. He is no longer attached to anyone. He has no reason to get angry with anyone. Verse 405. A Brāhmaṇa is he who is absolutely harmless. Nidhāya dandang bhūtesu, tasesu tāvaresu ca, yona hanti na gāteti, tang aham brūmi Brāhmanam. He who has laid aside the use of force towards all beings, whether feeble or strong, who neither harms nor kills, him I call a Brāhmana. A monk who was mistakenly beaten. Once a bhikkhu, after taking a proper subject, went to a forest to practice meditation. After he had attained arahanthood, he came back to the Buddha to offer his deep and profound gratitude. On his way, he passed through a village. Just as he was going through the village, a woman, having quarreled with her husband, ran out of her house. As she went along the road, she saw the bhikkhu and followed close behind him. The husband, coming after her, saw her walking behind the bhikkhu. He wrongly thought that the bhikkhu was taking his wife away. So he shouted at the bhikkhu and threatened to beat him. His wife entreated him not to beat the bhikkhu, but that made him more furious, and the husband beat the monk. After beating the bhikkhu, he took his wife away with him, and the bhikkhu continued on his way. On arrival at the Jetavana monastery, other bhikkhus saw bruises all over his body, and they attended to him. When they asked him if he was angry with the man who had beaten him so sorely, he answered in the negative. The other bhikkhus reported to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, this bhikkhu claims he has no more anger. Is it true?" The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, Arahants have laid aside the stick and the sword. They don't get angry even if they are beaten." So the Buddha confirmed that the bhikkhu had indeed become an Arahant. Verse 406. A Brāhmana is he who is friendly amongst the hostile. Aviruddhang viruddhesu attadandesu nibbutang sadanesu anadanang tang aham brūmi Brāhmanam. He who is friendly amongst the hostile, who is peaceful amongst the violent, who is unattached amongst the attached, him I call a Brāhmana. The Lady and Four Novices. Once, the wife of a Brahmin sent her husband to the Jetavana monastery to invite 4 bhikkhus for alms food at their house. She told him to specifically request for senior bhikkhus who were true Brahmanas. But 4 Arahant Samaneras were sent along with him. When his wife saw the young Samaneras, she was very disappointed and blamed the Brahmin for bringing such young Samaneras, or novice monks. She was furious with her husband, and she sent him back to the monastery to get senior bhikkhus. In the meantime, she refused to give the young Samaneras the higher seats, and she did not offer them alms food. When the Brahmin arrived at the monastery, he met the Venerable Sariputta and invited him to his house. Venerable Sariputta arrived at the house. He saw the 4 Samaneras and asked them if they had been offered alms food yet. On learning that they had not been given alms food yet, and also that food had been prepared only for 4 persons, he returned to the monastery. So the Brahmin had to go back again to the monastery. This time Venerable Mahamoggallana came, but he also returned to the monastery when he came to know of the true situation. By this time, the Samaneras were feeling hungry, and Sakka, the king of the Devas, seeing the state of things, took the form of an old Brahmin and came to the house. The Brahmin and his wife paid respects to the old Brahmin and offered him a seat of honor. But Sakka just sat on the ground and paid respects to the four Samaneras. Then he revealed that he was Sakka. Seeing that Sakka himself was paying respects to the young Samaneras, the Brahmin couple offered alms food to the Samaneras and Sakka. After the meal, the Samaneras and Sakka manifested their supernormal power. Sakka went back to his celestial abode, and the Samaneras returned to the monastery. When the incident was reported to the Buddha, he commented, "Bhikkhus, Arahants bear no ill will towards those who are hostile to them." Verse 407. A Brāhmaṇa is he who has discarded all passions. Yasara gocha dosocha mano makhocha patito sasapuriva aragga tang aham brahmi brahmanam. In whom lust, hatred, pride, detraction are fallen off like a mustard seed from the point of a needle, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Arahants have no mental defilements. Mahapantaka. Venerable Mahapantaka was already an Arahant when his younger brother Chulapantaka joined the order. Chulapantaka was born a dullard because he had made fun of a very dull bhikkhu in one of his past existences. He could not even memorize one verse in 4 months. Mahapantaka then suggested it would be better for his younger brother to leave the monastery. It was in this connection that, on one occasion, the bhikkhus asked the Buddha, "Do the Arahants still lose their temper? Do they still have mental defilements like ill will in them?" The Buddha explained, "Bhikkhus, Arahants have no mental defilements like passion and ill will in them. My son Mahapantaka acted as he did with the view of helping his brother and not out of ill will." Verse 408. A Brāhmaṇa is he who gives offence to none. Akakkasang vinyapaning giran satcham udiraye yaya nabhisaje kinchi tang aham brahmi brahmanam. He who speaks gentle, instructive, and true words, and who does not offend anyone by speech, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Force of habit, Pilinda Vacha. Venerable Pilinda Vacha had a very offensive way of addressing people. He would often say, "Come here, you wretch," or "Go there, you wretch," and such other things. One day several bhikkhus complained about his conduct to the Buddha. The Buddha sent for Vacha and spoke to him on the matter. Then, on reflection, he found that for many past existences, Vacha had been born only in the family of Brahmins, who regarded themselves as being superior to other people. So, the Buddha explained, "Bhikkhus, don't be offended with Vacha. He addresses as wretch only by force of habit, acquired in the course of his many previous existences as a Brahmin, and not out of malice. He has no intention of hurting others, for an Arahant does not harm others. Verse 409. A Brāhmaṇa is he who steals not. Yodha dighamva rasamva anumthulam subhasubham loke adinnang nadiyati tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who in this world takes nothing that is not given, be it long or short, small or great, fair or foul, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. The monk who was accused of theft. One day, a Brahmin from Savatthi laid his upper garment on the ground outside his house to air it. A monk saw that garment as he was going back to the Jetavana monastery. Thinking that it was a piece of cloth thrown away by someone, he picked it up. The Brahmin saw him picking up the piece of cloth and came after him, accusing and abusing him. "You shaven head, you are stealing my clothing," he said. The monk promptly returned the piece of cloth to the Brahmin. Back at the monastery, the monk related the above incident to other bhikkhus. The bhikkhus asked him jokingly whether the cloth was long, short, coarse, or fine. He replied, "Whether the clothing is long or short, coarse or fine, matters not to me. I am not at all attached to it." Other bhikkhus then asked the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, the monk says he has no more attachments. Is it true?" The Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, the monk speaks the truth. An Arahant does not take anything that is not given to him, and he is not attached to material things." Verse 410. A Brāhmaṇa is he who is desireless. Asa yassa na vijjanti asming loke paramhicha nirasayang visangyuttang tang aham bromi brahmanang. He who has no desire either for this world or for the next, who is free from craving and from moral defilements, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Bhikkhus misunderstand Sariputta. On one occasion, Venerable Sariputta, accompanied by many other bhikkhus, went to a monastery near a small village to spend the Vassa period. On seeing Venerable Sariputta, the people promised to provide all the requisites for the bhikkhus. However, at the end of the Vassa, not all the requisites had been received. So Venerable Sariputta said, "If people come to offer robes, send them to me. If they do not, please inform me also." Then he left for the Jetavana monastery to see the Buddha. Other bhikkhus misunderstood Venerable Sariputta's instructions and reported to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Venerable Sariputta is still attached to material things like robes and other requisites of a bhikkhu." The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, Sariputta has no more craving. His intention in asking you to bring the robes to him is that there will be no loss of merit to the lay disciples, and no loss of holy gain to the bhikkhus and samanera." Verse 411. A Brāhmaṇa is he who has no longings. Yassālaya na vijjanti anyāya akatham kati amato gandham anuppattam tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who has no craving, who through knowledge of the Four Noble Truths is free from doubts, and has realized Nibbana, the deathless, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Bhikkhus misunderstand Venerable Mahamoggallana. On one occasion, the bhikkhus told the Buddha the same thing they had said of Venerable Sariputta, this time about Venerable Mahamoggallana, that he still had attachment to worldly things. To them the Buddha said that Moggallana had discarded all craving. Verse 412. A Brāhmaṇa is he who has transcended good and evil. Yodha punyancha papancha ubho sangang upacchaga asokang virajang suddhang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who has transcended both good and bad, and the ties as well, who is sorrowless, stainless and pure, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Go beyond good and evil, Revata. One day, a group of bhikkhus said to the Buddha, Samanera Revata is getting many offerings from people. He is gaining fame and fortune. Even though he lives alone in the forest, through supernormal power, he has now built many monasteries for a few hundred bhikkhus. The Buddha said, Bhikkhus, my son Revata has discarded all craving. He has attained Arahanthood. Verse 413. A Brāhmaṇa is he who is pure. Chandang va vimalang suddhang vippasang nang anavilang nandi bhava parikhinang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who is spotless as the moon, who is pure, serene, and unperturbed, who has destroyed craving for becoming, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. The youth with a shining body. Chandabha. Venerable Chandabha, in a previous existence, had made offerings of sandalwood to a stupa where the relics of Kassapa Buddha were enshrined. For this good deed, he was reborn in a Brahmin family in Savatthi, with a distinguishing mark, a circle of light radiating from his navel. As this circle of light resembled the moon, he came to be known as Chandabha. Some Brahmins, taking advantage of his unusual feature, took him to the city to exhibit him, and only those who paid money were allowed to touch him. On one occasion, they came to a place near the Jetavana monastery. To the devotees going to the Jetavana monastery, they said, What is the use of you going to the Buddha and listening to his Dhamma? There is no one who is as powerful as Chandabha. One who touches him will get rich. Why don't you come and see? The devotees replied, Only our teacher is powerful. He is unrivaled and matchless. Then the Brahmins took Chandabha to the Jetavana monastery to compete with the Buddha. But when he was in the presence of the Buddha, the ring of light went out by itself. When he was taken out of sight of the Buddha, the ring of light returned automatically. It again disappeared when taken back to the presence of the Buddha. Chandabha then thought to himself, Without a doubt, the Buddha knows the skill by which he can make this light disappear. So he urged the Buddha to teach him the skill. However, the Buddha advised him to enter the holy order first, before he would teach him the skill. Chandabha then told his Brahmin friends to wait for him while he entered the holy order to learn the skill. As a monk, he was instructed to contemplate on the body, to reflect on the repulsiveness and impurity of the 32 parts of the body. Within a few days, Chandabha attained Arahanthood. When those Brahmins came and inquired whether he had acquired the skill, Chandabha replied, "You people had better go back now. As for me, I am not interested to go away from this place." When other bhikkhus reported what Chandabha had said, the Buddha replied, "Chandabha speaks the truth. He has eradicated all his mental impurities." A note from the author. On another occasion, the Buddha remarked that those who perform miracles to gain followers are like tradespeople who employ dancing girls to sell their products. Verse 414. A Brāhmaṇa is he who clings to naught. Yo imang palipatang duggang sangsarang mohang acchaga tinno paragato jhayi anejo akatam kati anupadaya nibbuto tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who, having traversed this dangerous swamp of passion, this difficult road of moral defilements, the ocean of life of samsara, and the darkness of ignorance of moha, and having crossed the fourfold flood, has reached the other shore of nibbana, who practices tranquility and insight meditation, who is free from craving and from doubt, who clings to nothing and remains in perfect peace, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. An unusually long pregnancy. Sivali. Princess Suppavasa was in pregnancy for an unduly long period. When she was in labor pain for several days, she kept contemplating on the unique qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Finally, she sent her husband to the Buddha to pay respects on her behalf. When informed of the condition of the princess, the Buddha said, "May Suppavasa be free from danger and fear. May she safely give birth to a healthy, noble son." As the verse was being recited, Suppavasa gave birth to a healthy son. On that very day, the Buddha and some bhikkhus were invited to the house for alms food to celebrate the birth of the child. When the child grew up, he became a bhikkhu and was known as Sivali. He attained arahanthood as soon as his head was shaved. Later, he became famous as the bhikkhu who received offerings without any difficulty. As a recipient of offerings, he was unsurpassed. On one occasion, the bhikkhus asked the Buddha why Sivali had been confined to his mother's womb for an unduly long period. The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, in a previous existence, Sivali was a prince who lost his kingdom to another king. In trying to regain the kingdom, he had besieged the city on the advice of his mother. As a result, the people of the city were without food or water for several days. It was for this evil deed that Sivali and his mother had to suffer during the pregnancy and the delivery." Verse 415. A Brāhmaṇa gives up sense desires. Yodha kame pahatvana anagaro paribhajye kama bhava parikhinang tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who in this world, giving up sense desires, has renounced the worldly life and become a homeless one. He who has destroyed sense desires and has come to the end of existence, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. A courtesan tempts a monk. Sundara Samudda. Sundara Samudda was the son of a wealthy family from Savatthi. After he entered the order, he left for Vagga, a distance away from Savatthi, to practice meditation. One day, while some festivals were going on in Savatthi, the parents of Sundara Samudra missed him very much. They felt very sorry for their son, and both started to weep. At that time, a courtesan saw them and inquired what the matter was. On hearing about their son, the courtesan said, "If I could make your son leave the order and return to the life of a layman, how would you reward me?" The parents answered that they would make her rich. The courtesan then asked for a large sum of money and left for Vagga. At Vagga, she rented a house on the route where Sundara would come on his alms round. She prepared good food and waited for him. On the first few days, she offered alms food to him at the door of her house. Later, she invited him to come inside. Meanwhile, she paid money to some children to come and play just outside the house, about the time he usually came on his alms round. This gave her the excuse that it was very dusty and noisy on the ground floor. With this excuse, she invited him to the top floor to have his meal. He consented and went up, and as soon as he entered the room, the courtesan closed the door. Then she started seducing him. She said, "Venerable sir, please be my beloved husband, and I will be your dearly beloved wife. After our long and happy wedded life, we can both enter the order and strive our very best to attain Nibbana." When he heard those words, the monk suddenly realized his mistake and got alarmed. Then he said to himself, "I, indeed, by being negligent and unmindful, have made a great mistake." At that instant, the Buddha realized what was happening to Sundara. He called Venerable Ananda and said to him, "Ananda, on an upper story of a pinnacled building in Vagga, there now goes on a struggle between Sundara and a courtesan. But in the end, the monk will be the winner." Using his supernormal power, the Buddha sent forth his radiance and exhorted him, "My son, get rid of the craving for wealth and sensual pleasures, and free yourself from lust." Reflecting mindfully on the advice given, Sundara attained Arahanthood. Verse 416. A Brāhmana gives up craving. Yodha tanhang pahatvana anagaro paribbaje tanha bhava parikhinang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who in this world, giving up craving, would renounce worldly life and become a homeless one. He who has destroyed craving and has come to the end of existence, him I call a Brāhmana. How Bhikkhu Jatila attained Arahanthood. Soon after the passing away of the previous Buddha Kassapa, an Arahant monk went round for donations to build a stupa where the relics of Kassapa Buddha were to be enshrined. The monk came to the house of a goldsmith who was at that time engaged in a heated quarrel with his wife. He shouted at the monk, "You had better throw away the relics and go back." His wife then said, "If you are angry with me, you should abuse only me. You can even beat me if you like, but why do you have to abuse the Buddha and the monk? Surely you have done a grievous wrong." Hearing her remarks, the goldsmith realized the enormity of the wrong he had done. Seeking to correct the wrong, he made some gold flowers, put them into 3 gold pots, and offered them to the stupa of Kassapa Buddha. In his present existence, the goldsmith was conceived in the womb of a rich man's daughter who had an illicit love affair. When the child was born, she put it into a pot and floated it down the stream. A young woman who was bathing in the stream saw the child, adopted him, and named him Jatila. Later, on the advice of a monk, the woman sent Jatila to Taxila, where he had his education. While at Taxila University, the monk arranged for him to stay at the house of a merchant who was a disciple of his. In due course, Jatila married the daughter of the merchant. Soon after the marriage, a large mound of gold was discovered in the backyard of the house, which was newly built for the couple. 3 sons were born from this marriage. After that, Jatila joined the order and attained Arahanthood. One day, as the Buddha went on an alms round with some bhikkhus, including Jatila, they came to the house of the sons of Jatila. The sons offered alms food to the Buddha and his disciples for 15 days. Some time afterwards, the bhikkhus asked Jatila whether he was still attached to his mound of gold and his sons, and he answered that he had no more attachment to them. The bhikkhus then reported what Jatila had said to the Buddha, and the Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, Jatila has got rid of craving and pride. He has attained arahanthood." The author includes a second story under this verse. The celestial mansion of Jyotika. Jyotika was a famous rich man from Vagga. He lived in a stately mansion. There were 7 walls around his mansion, each of which had an entrance guarded by some spirits. The fame of his wealth spread far and wide, and many people came to see his mansion. On one occasion, King Bimbisara came to visit Jyotika, bringing his son Ajatasattu with him. Ajatasattu, seeing the grandeur of Jyotika's mansion, vowed that he would not allow Jyotika to live in such a magnificent mansion when he became king. On the king's departure from his house, Jyotika presented the king with a large priceless ruby. It was the custom of Jyotika to give presents to all visitors who came to see him. When Ajatasattu ascended the throne after killing his father, King Bimbisara, he came with his soldiers to take the mansion of Jyotika by force. But as all the gates were guarded by the spirits, Ajatasattu and his soldiers had to retreat. The king proceeded to the Veluvana monastery, and he found Jyotika listening to a discourse given by the Buddha. Seeing Jyotika at the feet of the Buddha, the king explained, "After making your guards fight me, you are now pretending to be listening to a discourse?" Jyotika realized that the king had gone to take his place by force, and that he had been compelled to retreat. In a past existence, Jyotika had made a solemn wish that his property might not be taken away from him against his wish, and this wish had been fulfilled. So Jyotika said to him, "O king, my property cannot be taken away against my wish." Saying this, he stretched out his 10 fingers and asked the king to take off the rings he was wearing on his fingers. The king tried hard to take them off, but did not succeed. Jyotika then asked the king to spread out a piece of cloth, and as Jyotika put his fingers on the cloth, all the rings slipped out from his fingers, and he presented them to the king. Then Jyotika requested that he permitted to join the order. Soon after entering the order, Jyotika attained arahanthood. One day, when other bhikkhus asked him whether he had any more craving left in him for his mansion, his wealth, he answered that he did not. The bhikkhus asked the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Jyotika claims to have attained arahathood. Is it true?" The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, Jyotika speaks the truth. He does not have any more craving in him. He is now an Arahant." Verse 417. A Brāhmana discards all bonds. Hitva manusakang yogam dibbang yogam upachaga sabba yoga visangyuttang tang aham brumi brahmanam. He who, discarding human ties and transcending celestial ties, is completely delivered from all ties, him I call a Brāhmana. The monk who was a dancer. Nata Puttaka. Once, Nata Puttaka, the dancer, had the chance to listen to a discourse given by the Buddha. After listening to the discourse, he entered the order and attained arahanthood. One day, while the Buddha and the bhikkhus, including Nata Puttaka, were going on an alms round, they met another dancer in the street. Seeing the young man dancing, the other bhikkhus asked Nata Puttaka whether he still liked dancing. He replied, "No, I do not." The bhikkhus reported to the Buddha that Nata Puttaka claimed he did not like dancing any more. Thereupon the Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, he has gone beyond all bonds of attachment. He has become an Arahant." Verse 418. A Brāhmana is he who has given up likes and dislikes. Hitva ratincha aratincha siti bhutang nirupading sabba loka bhibum virang tang ahang brumi brahmanang. He who has given up likes and dislikes, who is cooled and is without defilements, who has conquered the world and is strenuous, him I call a Brāhmana. The monk who was a dancer. As in the previous story, the dancer had entered the order and had attained arahanthood. The Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, Nata Puttaka has given up taking delight in all things." Verse 419. A Brāhmana is he who is not attached. Chutimyo vedi sattanang upapattincha sabbaso asattang sugatang buddhang tang aham brumi brahmanang. He who in every way knows the death and rebirth of beings, who is not attached, well gone and awakened, him I call a Brāhmana. Verse 420. A Brāhmana is he who is an Arahant. Yassa gatinna jananti deva gandhabba manusa hina savang arahantang tang ahan brumi brahmanang. He whose destiny neither gods nor gandhabas nor men know, who has destroyed all taints and corruptions, and is far removed from passions, an Arahant, him I call a Brāhmana. Vangisa, the skull tapper. Once, in Rajagha, there was a Brahmin by the name of Vangisa, who, by simply tapping the skull of a dead person, could tell whether that person was reborn in the world of the Devas, or the human beings, or a suffering state. The Brahmins took Vangisa to many villages, and people flocked to him and paid handsomely to find out from him where their various dead relatives were reborn. On one occasion, Vagga and his companions came to a place not far from the Jetavana monastery. Seeing many people who were going to the Buddha, the Brahmins invited them to come to Vagga, who could tell where their relatives had been reborn. But the people said to him, "What does Vagga know? Our teacher is one without a rival. He only is the awakened one." As a result, there was a heated argument between the people and the Brahmins. Finally, one person said, "Come now, let us go and find out which of the two knows more, Vagga or the Buddha." So they all went to the Jetavana monastery. The Buddha, knowing their intention, instructed a bhikkhu to bring the skull of a person reborn in hell, of a person reborn in the animal world, of a person reborn in the human world, of a person reborn in the Deva world, and also that of an Arahant. The 5 were placed in a row. When Vagga was shown the skulls, he could tell where the owners of the first 4 skulls were reborn. But when he came to the skull of the Arahant, he was at a loss. The Buddha said, "Vagga, don't you know? I know where the owner of that skull is." Vagga then urged the Buddha to teach him the skill by which he would be able to tell where that particular person was reborn. The Buddha advised him to enter the holy order first, before he would teach him the skill. So, Vagga told his Brahmin friends to wait for him while he entered the holy order to learn the skill. As a bhikkhu, he was instructed by the Buddha to contemplate on the 32 parts of the body. He diligently practiced meditation as instructed, and within a short time attained arahanthood. When the other Brahmins came to ask him whether he had acquired the skill, Vagga said, "You all had better go now. There is no need for me to learn the skill any more. I will no longer go along with you." Other bhikkhus, hearing him, asked the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Vagga claims to have attained arahanthood. Is it true?" The Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, he really knows the death and rebirth of beings. He is an Arahant." Verse 421. A Brāhmaṇa is he who yearns for nothing. Yassa purecha pachacha majhecha nati kinchanang akinchanang anadanang tang aham brahmi brahmanang. He who does not cling to the past, future, and the present, khanda aggregates, and who is free from moral defilements and attachments, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. The wife who became a bhikkhuni, Dhammananda. Once there was a lay disciple of the Buddha named Visakha in Vagga. After hearing the Buddha's discourse, he attained the 3rd stage of sainthood and said to his wife, "Please accept all my property. From today I am not going to take part in worldly affairs." His wife, Dhammananda, replied that she would not accept his property and wealth, and instead asked for permission to join the order of bhikkhunis. After becoming a bhikkhuni, she went away from Vagga and practiced meditation diligently. Within a short time, she attained arahanthood. Her husband, hearing that his former wife had returned, went to see her and asked some questions. When he asked her about the first 3 stages of sainthood, she answered him. But when he asked her questions on arahanthood, she said, "This matter is out of your depth. If you want, you may go and ask the Buddha." When he posed the same question, the Buddha said, "She has already answered your question. If you ask me, I shall have to give you the same answer." Saying this, the Buddha confirmed that Dhammadinna had attained Arahanthood. Verse 422. A Brāhmaṇa is he who is enlightened. Usabhang pavarang virang, mahesing vijita vinang, anejang nahatakam buddhang, tang aham brumi brahmanang. The fearless, the noble, the hero, the great sage, the conqueror, the desireless, the cleanser of defilements, the enlightened. Him I call a Brāhmaṇa. Angulimala and the elephant. On one occasion, King Pasenadi and Queen Mallika made an alms offering to the Buddha and his bhikkhus on a scale which could not be surpassed by anyone else. At that ceremony, each bhikkhu was to have an elephant holding a white umbrella over his head as a sunshade. However, there was one elephant short, and so they had to put in an untrained elephant, and it was allotted to hold the umbrella over Venerable Angulimala. Everyone was afraid that the untrained elephant might give trouble, but when brought near Angulimala, it became docile. It was with reference to this incident that the bhikkhus later asked Venerable Angulimala whether he had been frightened. He answered that he was not. When the bhikkhus reported what he had said, the Buddha replied, "Bhikkhus, it is true that Angulimala was not afraid. Arahants who are like him are also not afraid." Verse 423. A Brāhmaṇa is he who is perfect. Pubbhe nivāsaṃ vedhi, sagga payancha passati, atho jatikhayaṃ patto, abhiññā vosito muni, sabbha vosito vosānaṃ, taṃ aham brūmi brahmanam. That sage who knows his former abodes, who sees the blissful and the woeful states, who has reached the end of births, who, with superior wisdom, has perfected himself, who has completed the holy life, and reached the end of all passions, him I call a Brāhmaṇa. The offering of Devahita. On one occasion, the Buddha suffered from a gastric ailment, and he sent Venerable Upavana to get some hot water from Devahita, who was very pleased to have this rare opportunity to offer something to the Buddha. So, in addition to the hot water, he also gave him some molasses. At the monastery, Upavana prepared the warm bath for the Buddha. After the bath, he offered him a mixture of molasses with the hot water. After drinking the mixture, the Buddha felt better. Devahita then came and asked, "Venerable Sir, an offering made to whom gives more benefit?" The Buddha replied, "Devahita, an offering made to one who has given up all evil is the most beneficial." Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. This concludes the verses of the Dhammapada.